Welcome everyone to the August 2021 meeting of the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara. My name is Judy Flattery. I'm the president of the Society. Our topic today is American conspiracy theories, and our speaker is Joe Uscinski, who's a professor of political science from the University of Miami. Conspiracy theory seems to be all in the news now. There's election conspiracy theories and vaccine conspiracy theories, and we wonder who's behind them and do they have an agenda, or is it an honest misunderstanding? Are there more than there used to be? Seems like it. Is it true? What's the impact of social media? What does it have to do with the end of the TV fairness doctrine in the 90s and people becoming more tribal? And we fall for them because sometimes they're true. And our friends and families get sucked in, and then we get tension and conflict. And how do we protect ourselves? How do we protect others? It just seems that there's a swirl of discourse on conspiracy theories, and what a fascinating area of research. And what does this have to do with humanism? Why are humanists interested in this? So sometimes I like to pull up the Paul Kurtz Affirmations of Humanism and see what does this topic have to do with humanism. And two of the affirmations that he noted that I think are appropriate are, first of all, as humanists, we're committed to the application of reason and science to the understanding of the universe and to the solving of human problems. And secondly, that we are skeptical of untested claims to knowledge, and we're open to novel ideas and seek new departures in our thinking. Our speaker today is Professor Joe Uscinski, Professor of Political Science, University of Miami. He studies public opinion and mass media with a focus on conspiracy theories and related misinformation. He's co-author of American Conspiracy Theories, editor of Conspiracy Theories and the People Who Believe Them, and a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. And I noticed he's published in this article. Those of you who are members of CSI and get this magazine, this is the February issue that talked about the amazing Randy, and he's got an article in here about conspiracy theories. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Joe. Welcome, welcome, and thank you for being a speaker for us in Santa Barbara.
Yep, well, thank you all for having me. Thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you for the plug of the February issue of the Skeptical Inquirer. You can read an article from me in the February issue, and then a bunch of angry letters telling me how wrong I am in the issue that follows that, along with a brief rebuttal from me. Conspiracy theories are a controversial topic because everybody believes one, if not a few, but we all disagree about which ones are true. And even more, we disagree about which ones are crazy and probably should not be believed in by anyone. So it's an area of intense disagreement and controversy. In terms of what we can do about these theories, we're sort of stuck in a strange place because you can't remove something that is just part of human nature. And I'm not sure if we could remove conspiracy theories that I would want to live in a world without them. Sometimes these ideas are very important, and sometimes they're true. And if we were to get rid of these ideas, it would allow the powerful among us to get away with conspiring without anyone to investigate or call them on it. So I don't want to take the tack that these conspiracy theories are necessarily irrational or wrong. At the same time, I want to be honest about their potential dangers and their epistemological value. So what am I going to talk about for the next 30 or 40 minutes? I'll talk about conspiracy theories. I'll give you some definitions of different terms, and we'll work through some of these concepts. I'll talk about why these ideas are believed. I will talk about how prevalent these theories are. I'll talk about some of my latest polling numbers. I will talk about the consequences of conspiracy theories, and I will perhaps touch on a little bit what we can do about these ideas. And towards the end, I'm going to talk about how the media coverage of conspiracy theories in the last few years have gotten so many things wrong. So much so that the media is often spreading misinformation and conspiracy theories about conspiracy theories. So sort of meta at that point. And then I'll leave it open for any questions at the end. So no offense intended with anything that I say in this talk. Conspiracy theories are a controversial topic, and they address things that are difficult for us to negotiate. And those are power and truth. You know, what are powerful people doing when no one's watching? What's the truth about the events in our society? These are things that we're always debating, and there's no reason that we should all agree all the time. On top of that, real conspiracies do happen, and everyone is guilty at some time of believing one, if not a few, and of spreading them as well. So I don't really see it as the conspiracy theorist, irrational people over there, and then the rest of us sane people over here. Instead, I think of the world in terms of a matter of degrees. Some people are very susceptible to conspiracy theories. They believe many, many conspiracy theories. And then there are other people less so. At the same time, there are some people who are so resistant to conspiracy theories that they won't even believe real conspiracies that actually have occurred. So on either end of that spectrum, you wind up with excesses that can be potentially dangerous. Just before I get going, I'll say I'm not one of them. I have a whole email inbox accusing me of being one of them, whoever them is, whether it's the deep state or some governmental group who wants to shut down free debate. I have no interest in that. So I'm not one of them. If you ever want to test out what I'm saying here, I guess there were things that my mother told me I should never talk about, and religion and politics were those two things. I would add conspiracy theories to that list of things not to talk about in polite company. So if you want to test and see if that's true at the next Thanksgiving, after a few bottles of wine have gone down, try out a handful of conspiracy theories and see what happens. I used to do that, and I don't get invited to Thanksgiving anymore. So that only proves me right, I think. So what are we talking about? Why don't we try to define these terms? So conspiracy, in the way that I use it, in the sorts of conspiracies that I am concerned about, are events which involve small groups of powerful people working in secret for their own benefit against the common good, and in a way that undermines our bedrock ground rules against the widespread use of force and fraud. And we know that a conspiracy took place because the appropriate knowledge-generating bodies have gathered evidence, they've had experts examine that evidence, and all that data and evidence is out there and available for anyone to refute should they want to do so. So when I'm talking about a conspiracy in this sense, I'm not talking about two guys conspired to knock over the 7-Eleven, or the woman and her lover conspired to kill the cuckold husband. I'm talking about things that go far beyond simple crimes. I'm talking about attempts to undermine bedrock ground rules against the widespread use of force and fraud. The most common example is Watergate. We know Watergate happened because there was data collected, people admitted to their crimes in open court. The FBI, Congress, numerous other agencies, and journalists gathered bodies of evidence. So we got a pretty good idea of what happened, who did it, and for what reason. If anyone wanted to say Watergate didn't happen, they can certainly do that and try to challenge it, but they have an up-road hill in front of them because the data is there and it's been widely examined, and this is the conclusion. With conspiracy theory, it's just a little bit different. So a conspiracy theory is an accusatory perception in which a small group of powerful people are working in secret for their own benefit against the common good, and in a way that undermines, again, our bedrock ground rules against the widespread use of force and fraud. But the difference is, with the conspiracy theory, the appropriate knowledge-generating bodies have not come to the conclusion that the conspiracy has actually occurred. So in that sense, conspiracy theory isn't used to denote something that's false. or irrational, but rather simply to say it's a theory in the sense that it potentially could be true, but the appropriate experts have not concluded as such yet. For me, that means that there isn't warrant to believe a conspiracy theory then, because the experts in that area haven't concluded that it's true. So I might say it's worthwhile to investigate a particular theory, to gather evidence and to look into it further. And as that evidence builds, then we should continue our search if the evidence warrants it. But I think there are a lot of conspiracy theories where there's very little evidence and very few experts saying that it's real. And in that sense, to keep following it, to me, just becomes a degenerative research program. So a good example is the Kennedy assassination. You've had government bodies, namely the Warren Commission, investigate the Kennedy assassination. They concluded it was a lone gunman named Lee Harvey Oswald. If you believe that the CIA, Castro, Vice President Johnson, the Soviets, the mafia, or some other group took part in the assassination, then you're engaging with conspiracy theory. And that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that you are engaging with a theory that contradicts the reigning and best evidenced account at this point. Conspiracy theory is an infinitely sized bucket of ideas. So anyone can make up anything they want, anytime they want, to serve any need they have. So people are coming up with new conspiracy theories all the time about all sorts of things. So this bucket of ideas is constantly expanding. Everything new that happens in the world, people come up with new conspiracy theories to explain it or to undermine it in some way. Most conspiracy theories that are out there die on the vine. You might hear it at the water cooler. You might see it on Twitter at 3 a.m. Your median conspiracy theory dies very quickly. It won't have movies made about it. No one's going to poll on it. It's not going to attract journalist attention. Most of them are here and gone. It's only a relative few that will actually be polled on, that will actually attract large numbers of people to them, that will have TV shows or movies or books written about them. So in this sense, conspiracy theories are a lot like fan fiction. People can just make up whatever they want, and there are no official versions of conspiracy theories. What's not included in the conspiracy theory bucket? So if we're talking about demons, gods, angels doing things, if we're just talking about the existence of aliens or people using ESP or something like that, that's not a conspiracy theory. Those might be better termed as paranormal, supernatural, or pseudoscience-y claims. But unless you're arguing that a small group is working in secret to undermine bedrock ground rules, we're not really talking about conspiracy theory. So Bigfoot, if Bigfoot exists, it's not a conspiracy theory. If there's a whole army of Bigfoots conspiring to get us somehow, then I guess that would be a conspiracy theory of Bigfoots conspiring against us. But rarely do I hear anyone saying that. So conspiracy theory is a little bit different than the idea of misinformation, which we hear a lot about in the news as of late. Misinformation can include conspiracy theories. But for the most part, misinformation is an equally large bucket of ideas. It's anything false or misleading that whenever it's shared, it could bring somebody to an incorrect conclusion. And that could be the intent or not. So sometimes you could just have misinformation out there that people thought was true, but it wasn't their intent to trick anyone. It's just they didn't know what they were sharing was false. And that makes it a little bit different than disinformation, which is misinformation, which is purposely shared with an intent to trick people or get people riled up. So generally that's used for political purposes. If it's Russia wants to do a disinformation campaign to trick American voters for whatever reason. And these concepts overlap with the idea of fake news, which is people making stuff that looks like real news. It mimics it in every way, except it doesn't really have a tight tether to the truth. There's no editorial gatekeeping. There isn't any incentive to make sure that what you're saying is actually true. So instead with fake news, it's We could just make stuff up to bring in clicks or to influence people in a particular way, but we're not trying to build a reputation based on being truthy. One thing I want people to understand going forward is that often the term misinformation, which to me means the information itself that is wrong, is often combined with the idea of beliefs in misinformation. And those are two very different things. So you can find misinformation on social media. Whether anyone believes it or not is a completely different matter. And that's something I'll get to later in the talk. Because if there's a ton of misinformation floating around in the ether, that's bad, sure. But if no one's really seeking it out or believing it when they do run into it, then that's a different matter. So here's some examples of fake news that I have seen bouncing around on family members' Facebook pages from time to time. So here's one. This got shared a couple 100,000 times a few years ago. It said the child actor from Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin, had gone onto French radio and said that Hollywood executives tortured and ate child actors and did satanic rituals to them. And he told the whole story about how these rich Hollywood executives would cook the children and then use the cooked skin as shoe leather for their shoes. If you did a quick Google on this headline, it would bring you right to Snopes, and Snopes would say, no, he never did a radio appearance in France. He never said any such thing. And there's no evidence of these sorts of things going on. But you can think about how convincing these sorts of things are if you're inclined towards those sorts of beliefs, because they say, oh, he did this in France. So of course you can't, it's not like the regular person can verify that, because most people in the US don't speak French and they don't know French radio, and they're not going to be able to hunt this down. And especially because radio appearances just sort of go into the wind, right? So it makes it sort of tough to falsify, but luckily we have groups like Snopes and other ones that sort of take on these ideas. After Hillary Clinton in 2016 got sick, she was campaigning for president, was shaking a lot of hands. Of course, you were going to catch, pneumonia or the flu from doing that. So she got sick and almost passed out at a 9/11 memorial in 2016. They rushed her off in a van and people could see her faint. When she came out, there was a lot of fake news the next day saying that was in fact a body double, because that was the wrong size pantsuit. It wasn't the same cut. So, and some people even went so far as to say she's dead and has a body double who's now walking around in her place. To deal with these rumors during the campaign, she went on to the Jimmy Kimmel show and opened a jar of pickles to show how strong she was and that she was strong enough to be president. And of course, the next day, the conspiracy theorist said, that was all a ruse. The pickle jar was, of course, already opened. It's a scam. And this is my favorite. During the 2014 Ebola spread that was going on in Africa and came to the US a little bit, this got shared around. And I think it was because this was going on at a time where everyone really was into zombies because of the Walking Dead show. And this piece of fake news was shared by InfoWars, by Alex Jones. He talked about this, but they were saying that people were catching Ebola in Africa, dying and getting buried, and then rising from the grave later as Ebola zombies. And you could see the picture of the zombie there. Of course, you do any checking into this, it's not actually a zombie because those don't exist, but rather an extra from a Brad Pitt movie about zombies called World War Z. So lots of nonsense floating around out there. And again, the fake news, disinformation, misinformation bucket is always expanding. There's always lots of wrong and bad ideas around for people to buy into should they choose to. There's nothing new about that. So this stuff is out there. It's floating in the ether. Why do people believe in it? Why will they adopt conspiracy theories or pieces of misinformation as beliefs? Well, what that question really devolves down to is, why do people believe anything, right? And the answer is simple: for lots of reasons. People will come to beliefs for a lot of different reasons, and me and someone else might come to the same beliefs, but for different reasons. But me and someone else might come to different beliefs, but for very same reasons, right? So there's all sorts of mechanisms out there that are driving us to adopt beliefs. And it's not going to be the same for any one person, but what I'll try to do is sort of paint with broad strokes here. So perhaps to try to get the most mileage with the least amount of complications. With that in mind, again, conspiracy theory and misinformation are big buckets. So what might drive a person to believe in conspiracy theory A might not lead them to believe in conspiracy theory B. So what are these factors that seem to explain the most when it comes to beliefs in conspiracy theories? Well, it's our group attachments that seem to do quite a bit of it. So we like to think that our group is upright and upstanding, and the other groups are the ones who are out to get us. They're bad, they're evil, and they're the ones who are conspiring. It's never us. It's always them. But of course, what do they say? They say, we're the upstanding people. It's them who are the ones who are conspiring. So you can easily see this when you look at the political parties. Republicans tend to believe that it's the Democrats who are conspiring and vice versa. Both think that their side is good and both think the other side is bad, right? And we find this not just with political parties, but also with religious attachments and whatnot. So our group identities very much drive who we accuse of conspiring and what we accuse them of doing. So people tend to use what's called motivated reasoning to sort of, they see something they don't like and they say, well, it must be the other group that did it. It can also work like if somebody accuses us of doing something wrong, or perhaps we did do something wrong. We might say, well, no, your accusation is really an attempt, you're conspiring against me. We're okay over here. Beyond our group attachments, it's also our latent dispositions that will drive which ones we buy into. So partisanship, as I explained, we like to accuse the other party rather than our own. But there are two other dispositions that seem to explain quite a bit. And one is what I call conspiracy thinking. And notice that some people just have a latent attraction to conspiratorial logic. They look out the window at the world and say, there's something that happened. It's probably a conspiracy behind it. Those are things that are going on. It's probably conspiracies behind it. So there's people that just view events and circumstances as the product of shadowy conspiracies pulled off by people they don't like. Denialism is another factor, another latent trait. And you will meet people like this throughout your lifetime, where people who will get authoritative information and they'll just say, I don't believe it. I don't want to believe it. I don't care. And they have a wall between them and information coming in. They just deny things. In terms of conspiracy thinking and denialism, we all do these things to some extent or another, some very much so, some very little so. But we can track and measure on our surveys how much individuals have these latent dispositions. Our beliefs can also come from our information environment. So whether we're on social media, what we're seeking out on social media, what we're watching in the mainstream media, what we watch for entertainment. We tend to take a lot of cues from our trusted political leaders, whatever party we're in. And we tend to take cues from our friends, family, and social groups. And even beyond all those factors, people can just make stuff up. So it's not the case that, I believe a conspiracy theory because someone told it to me. I could just make things up and believe them. And all of us do that from time to time. It's not always a question of spread, as we often talk about it now. And I will also say, too, there's a lot of building evidence showing that people with antisocial personality traits, like people high in narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and things like anomie, like you see the future as being very dark and bad. Those sorts of folks with toxic personality traits are also very likely to buy into conspiracy theories, particularly conspiracy theories that we might consider to be extreme, such as no one died at Sandy Hook, or the Holocaust is a hoax. So when I measure these sorts of things on my surveys, I'll give people statements like this, and they seem sort of innocuous, and some people strongly agree with these, some will strongly disagree, but that's sort of the point, is people have different views on each of these statements. Now, from these statements, I develop scores for each of my survey respondents, and I can sort of pinpoint just how likely they are to buy into conspiracy theories, how strong they are in conspiracy thinking, and how much they like to deny authoritative information. Now, again, a lot of people would agree somewhat with each of these, right? But not everyone. And even if we all decided we did agree, we would agree to, with different amounts of intensity too. So there's quite a bit of variation in each of these statements. So for example, for conspiracy thinking, we'll say to people, how much do you agree or disagree with this statement? Much of our lives are being controlled by plots hatched in secret places. Again, nothing specific there. It's not a specific conspiracy theory. It's just getting to the idea of, do people sort of agree with this idea generally? And people can strongly agree, neither agree nor disagree, and whatnot. So from those, we can find out sort of who people are underneath the hood. And once we account for all those dispositions, our conspiracy thinking, our denialism, and our partisanship and political ideology, all of those dispositions, we can then think about people's beliefs as a product of two things. Some sort of information coming in, being laid over the top of a set of dispositions that we have, which then lead us to have a specific belief. So in that sense, I'll give you, a good example. At the end of the Obama administration, unemployment was about 4.8%. And people were saying, Democrats said, oh my gosh, Obama, when you came in, unemployment was 12%, now it's 4%, you've done a great job, hashtag thanks Obama. Republicans looked at the same number and said 4.8%, well, that's not really capturing what's really going on, and it should be lower than that, and even worse, Obama probably faked the numbers with those fancy guys from Chicago. Hashtag thanks Obama, right? Same exact information, completely different interpretations, driven entirely by people's dispositions. So when we see, why do people disagree so much? It's not because of the information per se, it's because of how they interpret it. So you can imagine three guys sitting at a pub, and we'll call one partisanship and ideology, another one denialism, and another one conspiracy thinking. And the first guy's looking at the TV and saying, well, I don't trust this news channel because they always root for the other party and they're in the bag and they're biased, so I don't believe what they say. The second guy's watching TV and saying, I don't believe what newscasters say. They're just full of lies and who knows what they're talking about. I'm not going to pay attention to them. And the conspiracy thinker there is watching the TV and saying, well, the mass media is involved in a big cover-up and they're trying to lie to us. And there's all sorts of things going on, but the media will never tell us the truth because they're in on it, right? Within each of us, these three guys are living to one extent or another. But for some people, they're living very, very strongly, and they interpret to a great extent how people view the world. So one thing we want to keep note of when we look at different conspiracy theories that are reported on in the news, we want to ask ourselves, well, if a conspiracy theory is being pushed by our partisan leaders, like if Donald Trump is saying it, or somebody on the Democratic side is saying it, then it's likely going to be people on that side who believe it. But it's not necessarily because those people are hardcore conspiracy theorists. It's going to be because they're just listening to their leaders. It can also be the case that people are just believing partisan conspiracy theories because they want to denigrate the other side. And in that sense, the motivation is very much born out of partisan animus rather than strictly an attraction to conspiracy theorizing. But when you get away from those partisan ideas, like Obama faked his birth certificate or George Bush blew up the Twin Towers, and you get to things that are sort of outside partisan bickering, like the Freemasons or genetically modified food, or the Holocaust, things that aren't normally part of our partisan debates, you will find that people on both sides of the aisle will believe in those conspiracy theories about equally. Now, I should remove vaccines from that because over the past month or two, unfortunately, the Republican Party has been engaging in a lot of anti-vaccine stuff, and they seem to have become a clearinghouse for a lot of anti-vax conspiracy theories. Whereas in the past, if you go back a handful of years, neither party really engaged in that stuff all that much. So unfortunately, vaccines are becoming a little more attached to parties. So how many people believe conspiracy theory? The best I can say is that just about everyone believes one, if not a few. I can't poll on all of them because there's an infinite number, but I'll just give you one example. So I polled on 23 conspiracy theories last March and got 91% of Americans believing at least one. So you can imagine if I polled on 50 or 100 conspiracy theories, everyone would believe in one, if not a few. So we all fall victim from time to time. So in that sense, there's no us and them in terms of the believers and the unbelievers. Instead, it's better to think of it as the people who really believe a lot of conspiracy theories versus the people who are much more resistant to them. Last year, I asked a bunch of conspiracy theories, and I'll give you, some of the sort of the lay of the land out there. About 15% of Americans believe that the Holocaust had been exaggerated for political purposes. About 17% thought that the shootings at Parkland and Sandy Hook had been faked as part of a false flag operation to take away guns. 22% think that climate change is a hoax. 25% think that 5G has hidden dangers that are being covered up. 1 in 3 Americans think that the government has made contact with aliens and is covering it up. 40-some-odd% think there's a secret, unaccountable deep state controlling the government. 40-some-odd% think that JFK was killed by a conspiracy rather than a lone gunman. I will point out that that number is actually quite lower than it was. It started out around 50% in 1963 and hit 80% for several decades and only come down since then. About 45% think there's hidden dangers of GMOs that are being covered up, and 50% think that Jeffrey Epstein was murdered rather than committed suicide. So we can see that some conspiracy theories attract, majority support, and some are more fringe. During COVID, we've seen numerous wacky theories about the pandemic, whether it's Bill Gates or George Soros using it to take over the world, 5G spreading it, the vaccine's going to have a microchip that's going to track you, that it's all a scam put out by Big Pharma, that doctors are faking patients. QAnon, which I'll get to later, spread a lot of ideas about the pandemic. In the beginning, they were saying perhaps Trump planned the pandemic as a way to root out the deep state and save all the trafficked children from the satanic deep state child molesters. So lots of wacky stuff, and you can still find it. I mean, there are lots of groups out there, even after, the vaccine is probably going to get full approval by the FDA very soon. It's incredibly safe. Yeah, you have groups out there saying it's going to have a microchip, or it's part of a population control plan where the elites want to kill off billions of people so they can have the planet to themselves. And this vaccine is just part of it. As the pandemic's gone on too, we've seen even weirder things getting pushed. We're going to be forced to eat bugs when the pandemic is over as part of what's called the Great Reset. Elites will dine on fine wine and exquisite meat, but we'll be eating cockroaches. Other conspiracy theorists are saying that we're going to be forced to do public anal swab testing for COVID. The idea isn't to really see if we have COVID, it's just to humiliate us and put us in our place so the elites can gain greater control. Polling on this stuff looks sort of like this. We get close to 30% of Americans buying into a lot of these ideas, whether it's the number of deaths are being faked, whether the threat of the virus is being exaggerated to hurt Trump, or whether it's some sort of bioweapon. You get consistently over time close to 30%. But then as you go down, you get fewer and fewer people buying into the more fringy ideas, like is Bill Gates behind it? We got about 13%. Should you spray yourself with disinfectant to cure your COVID? Only 12% believe that, luckily. So not everything is believed by everyone, and people tend to be picky and choosy with what they tend to buy in. So moving forward from the pandemic to last year's election, we had a lot of people believing a lot of things about the outcome, perhaps that it was fraudulent. Typically, we find that about 40% of Americans going into elections think that if the other side were to win, that it would have been due to fraud. After the election, it's just the losing side thinks that they were cheated. And very normally, it's about 40% of the losing side thinks that they lost because of fraud. So that's completely normal. And that's sort of what we found this year, with the exception being that Donald Trump and his allies in the conservative media and Congress have pushed the idea that it was rigged. And that has raised the numbers post-election. So that between 70 and 80% of Republicans now think that the election was rigged in favor of Biden, which is incredibly large and abnormal. But just so you know, the normal number isn't zero. It's usually around 40%. Nobody likes to lose. And politics isn't sports. But even going into the election, we found large numbers of people agreeing with ideas having to do with fraud. So 70% of Republicans believed, as Donald Trump was telling them, that mail-in ballots were part of fraud. A majority of Democrats believe that the U.S. Post Office was going to engage in fraud to withhold ballots. And that's what leaders on the Democratic side had been saying and being concerned about. 72% of Democrats thought that Donald Trump would not leave office willingly. Luckily, he did. And even 15% of Democrats thought in October that the election would be canceled, that Trump would cancel it. So lots of beliefs out there having to do with fraud. One thing I want to point out, though, is that as I poll on the same conspiracy theories over and over again, usually months apart, rarely do I find increases. It's either people believe in it or they don't, and it's not like people are just getting inundated with information on social media and then adopting these ideas. Instead, what's happening is that people's identities drive them to these beliefs. And if those identities and worldviews don't get them there, then they're not going to buy in. Most conspiracy theories are incredibly stable over long periods of time. Not everyone, but the vast majority. So with that said, I mean, there are major problems that can spring from conspiracy theories, because if people believe that there's a powerful group trying to kill them or something, they may want to fight fire with fire. And we see that all too often with people taking violent action to foil what they see as a conspiracy against them. We've seen with COVID that conspiracy theories can put people's behavior at cross purposes, with people, some people masking and social distancing and other people not. And it makes it difficult for governments to lead when you have emergencies, because a lot of people just won't believe what the government's saying. They'll think it's part of some conspiracy. And we see that with all sorts of emergencies over time. Even in Florida, during hurricanes, there's about 15 to 20% of Floridians who think that the government sent the hurricanes here, and that it's just not a naturally occurring thing. So if you believe that, your actions may reflect that. So are we more conspiratorial now? I will give you the short answer is no. This is a part of the human experience. And despite the news media saying over and over again that we are becoming more conspiratorial over time, I've found zero evidence of this. When we measure just generalized conspiracy thinking over the last 10 years, we found no increases on the right-hand side there. And just as an example, JFK, for example, that was believed by 80% of Americans between the 70s and 90s. And it's only come down in the internet era. So most conspiracy theories are not increasing. I'll end with this. So there's been a lot of talk about QAnon lately. And if you don't know what it is, it's a conspiracy theory that says the deep state is comprised of satanic sex traffickers, and Donald Trump was sent to take out this deep state, and that people can follow the goings on of Donald Trump and his secret agent named Q by following these anonymous clues on these fringe chat rooms like 8chan. These are the headlines, what they've been saying over the last 3 years since QAnon started. And these are the 4 claims that we get in the media, that QAnon is big, getting bigger, it's far right, and it's a product of social media use. We don't find any evidence for any of those claims. QAnon is probably the least believed conspiracy theory that I poll on consistently. It's between 5 and 8%, so that makes it much less than almost anything else I poll on. Often it's believed equally by people on both left and right. And the reason is because what's driving those beliefs are just more of antagonisms towards the establishment as a whole, rather than an extreme form of republicanism or conservatism. Even beyond that, it's not the case that people are slipping on a banana peel and then adopting crazy beliefs about sex traffickers controlling everything. These are beliefs that have been out there, have been floating around. It's many of the beliefs that QAnon adopted were part of our culture, in some cases for millennia, and they're just being activated by QAnon for whatever reason. It's not that people are going onto the internet and getting convinced of new things. It's just simply that they're seeking out what they probably already believe or are at least amenable to. We don't have a lot of evidence that conspiracy theories are going up, that these beliefs are increasing. Most of the forces that drive them are in here. They're within us and have little to do with communication technologies. And most conspiracy beliefs can be explained by the same things that explained opinions 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. Many conspiracy theories are decades, if not centuries, in the making. And one thing we all need to ask ourselves is, why is it the case that there's so much authoritative information online that's true, that somehow only the false stuff is able to convince people online? And that's something that this current panic about social media hasn't really been able to answer. So if we want to blame people for a lot of the misinformation out there, blame our political elites, blame our mainstream media, blame people in the partisan media, because they seem to have much more control and influence than some guy tweeting at 3 a.m. So I will leave it there, and thank you very much for the talk. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, Joe, with you being down in Miami, have you heard any conspiracy theories about the collapse of the Surfside condominiums?
No, but yes, actually I did, and I actually saw a bunch of anti-Semitic stuff going around because Israel had sent a team to help with the excavation, and then there are people saying, "Oh, the Jews must be behind it." But that almost seems to be a constant with anything that happens. Somebody will come up with something like that. You can, in those very tense situations, people are going to not fully understand what's going on. Right? Everyone wants answers right away. They want to find their loved one. And unfortunately, investigations and excavations and things like that take time. And it's not to everyone's satisfaction. And sometimes the, conspiracy theories can sort of be born of that frustration.
Can you say some more conspiracy theories that are real?
That are real? Well, it would be conspiracies that are real. Iran-Contra was real. You had people in the government selling arms illegally as part of some plot to get back hostages and other sordid things. There's a long list. There's an even longer list of conspiracies that had been proposed, whether it's within government or corporations, but hadn't been pulled off. They discussed it, talked about it, and then didn't decide to go through with it for whatever reason. But I tend to say this: there are powerful people conspiring against us right now, and it's important as citizens in a democratic society that we be vigilant and keep an eye on powerful people to make sure they don't abuse that power.
I have a question. There's been films about how Facebook and other social media are filtering information and sending people specific information based on their beliefs. Is that true? And does that sort of add to the problem?
Here's an interesting thing. There's a lot of talk lately about echo chambers, and are people getting stuck in these echo chambers where they're just getting reinforcement for what they already believe? And the answer is, it doesn't seem to be the case. There's a lot of studies coming out saying most people aren't trapped in echo chambers. Even more than that, most people aren't really paying attention to politics at all. So it's actually a small number of people who are really following politics closely. And I mean, here's the interesting thing. Even if, you know, it was the case that I was being funneled stuff that I already agree with, what's the causal mechanism? It's that I already agree with it. So how much am I being influenced? The answer is probably not all that much, right?
But maybe you're not receiving the other information.
Sure, but here's the interesting thing: is most people aren't trapped in these echo chambers. Most people are getting all sorts of stuff, and it's just not true that a majority of people are only seeing one thing, right? So.
But with advertising, aren't they doing that? Isn't that the purpose of it? So to get you to buy products, and so there is a way to manipulate the data that you get. Is that true?
Well, I don't know if manipulate's the best word. I mean, if I want to sell, you know, something, I don't want to sell it to people who I know are not in the intended demographic, right? I mean, let me give you two really good examples that I think you might be driving at. And one is Brexit with Cambridge Analytica, who supposedly used these amazing psychological models to influence people to vote for Brexit. And the other one was the Russian disinformation campaign to support Donald Trump with fake news and misinformation and conspiracy theories. There's no good evidence that either of those campaigns influenced anyone to change their vote. And in fact, many of the beliefs in favor of Brexit or support for Trump were already there. The beliefs were there a long time in advance. And you know, sometimes we're almost giving too much credit to Facebook and to political consultants and advertisers and giving them these mythic powers that, oh, with some cheap Facebook ad, they can control my brain and make me buy stuff or vote a certain way that I otherwise wouldn't have. And we have 100 years worth of studies on this that say, no, it just doesn't work that way. We're not lemmings just getting bounced around. Oftentimes, it's just the case, we're going to do whatever we do, and then we seek out information that supports that anyway. But again, it's not the information, it's not the ad that's influencing us.
Okay, thank you.
It's actually reassuring. And maybe it says that dropping of the fairness doctrine in the 90s didn't lead to the growth of conspiracy theories, or like you say, maybe when I make a decision, I'm going to buy this car, then I look for information to support my decision being the right one, as opposed to evaluating first.
Well, it's good and bad news, right?
And support.
Yeah, it's good and bad news in the sense that we're not being controlled by Mark Zuckerberg or whoever. I mean, we see tons of Facebook ads. Are we buying every single item? No. I've never bought anything on Facebook, and many people haven't either. If they had that sort of power, Facebook ads would have an infinite value to them because they'd be so powerful, but they don't, because they're not that influential. And, you know, so that's the good news. But the bad news is people believe all sorts of nonsense anyway, and always have, and we just weren't paying attention. And that's the issue. We're all paying more attention to misinformation and conspiracy theories now, far more than we ever did in the past. And that's creating an optical illusion where we think that, oh my God, we're hearing about it more, so it must be worse. But no, we're hearing about it more because it's easier to see. And it's because it might be more important now for whatever reason. But people aren't somehow more irrational, more crazy, more taken to conspiracy theories than they were previously.
I see there's a question in the chat, and I think you did cover this, but Tricia said she arrived late. Curious as to particular personalities that conspiracy theories appeal to.
Yeah, so a lot of people will believe things like JFK was killed by a conspiracy and, other conspiracy theories like that. And there's really no problem there. And it's not the case that those people are psychopaths or anything like that. For some people, we find that certain beliefs are indicative of darker personality traits. Some conspiracy theories feel different because they are different. If you were sitting at a table next to a JFK conspiracy theorist, you probably wouldn't get that frightened. But if you were sitting next to someone who says, no one died at Sandy Hook, or the Jews faked the Holocaust, you might be tempted to get up and leave. And there's a reason for that. I mean, those beliefs in our society are sort of antisocial ideas, and they seem to attract antisocial people.
What do you think is a good way to combat such things that pop up that you totally disagree with? It bothers me so much when I hear people saying government is bad, government is, that's what we have to be afraid of, when I think government could do more wonderful things, like they helped with the child health and reducing child poverty in the United States. But that's, of course, because I'm a liberal. But how do you combat stuff like that?
So what you're really asking me is, how can you get everyone to agree with you?
Yeah.
and that's a lot of what these questions boil down to. Even when I'm asked a question like, my cousin believes a crazy conspiracy theory, how can I change their mind? And the answer, this might not be satisfying, but that is that, do we really want anyone to have that power? Right? I mean, persuade the person if they're not interested in evidence and persuasion, wish them a good day and go on with your life, right? But if there seems to be this arms race now to figure out, how can I make other people agree with me? How can I make other people believe the right thing? And the same tools that can do those things can make people believe the wrong thing too, for really bad reasons. And I'm not convinced that I want government or social media companies or anyone to have tools that can change minds that easily. And if that means that I have to put up with a portion of the population believing wrong stuff from time to time, then I guess I'll have to deal with it, right? But in terms of just overall changing people's minds on stuff, good luck. Like, are you going to put an atheist and a Catholic in a closet for 10 minutes and they come out, you believe in 10 commandments, I believe in none, we'll compromise on 5? No, that's not going to happen. You're not going to put a Republican and a Democrat in a room and have them change each other's minds. I mean, people have things that are important to them, and maybe it's not the case that we should have quick and easy tools to flip everybody's minds on and off. And this comes back, and I'll just say one more thing. This comes back to the question I was asked earlier about the influence of social media, ads, and whatnot. On the one hand, we're saying these people, so many people out there, they can't have their minds changed. They're impervious to new information. But at the same time, we say, well, they're so easily influenced by anything and everything they see online. I mean, those two things aren't really compatible, right? So I think a lot of what's been going on with social media is just yet another in a long line of social panics about new technologies. And at the end of the day, I'm not finding any increases in conspiracy beliefs between now and the pre-internet era that are a cause for an alarm. And more often than not, conspiracy theory beliefs are becoming less believed over time rather than more so. So, I can only report what the data says. So what we wound up with social media is sort of this place where we're trying to find a cause, for an effect that might not exist.
I was thinking about the street epistemology approach people like Matt Dillahunt use, where you find somebody with an opposing view and it's like, well, what do you believe? And then listen to what they say. And why do you believe that? And listen to what they say. And how do you know it's true? and that people are more likely to change their own belief by hearing themselves talk rather than be convinced by somebody else. Do you have any thoughts on that street epistemology
It's not
conversation?
what, it's not what I do. I can't tell you how well that would work. I have family members who are hardcore conspiracy theorists, so I am often reticent to give advice on how to talk to people because, if I can't do it, then I'm not in a position to tell anyone else what to do. But here's the thing: have sympathy and empathy for others. And if someone isn't open to persuasion, then just wish them a good day and leave it at that.
Okay.
In the big picture, which is the bigger problem? Too much trust or too little?
I don't even know what trust is. So that's I guess that would be my answer. Often what's been talked about recently is that, oh my God, people don't trust institutions enough, or they don't trust this or that enough, and that's what's leading to the problems. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, it's sort of difficult because when you read the news and it's like, this politician's crooked and corrupt, and that one's crooked and corrupt, and that one's crooked and corrupt, but you got to trust government more, right? It's sort of like mixed messages that we always get. And I'm not sure what the answer to it is, other than something like this: trust but verify. I tend not to believe things until somebody can back it up with evidence and experts.
Which is very difficult. The verification is extremely difficult.
Yeah, and that's why I stay in my lane. I have one thing that I do. If you ask me about plumbing or cars or anything else, I would say, I don't know. But I'm sure we can find some experts who know something about it. And it sort of, that's how I try to approach the world, right? And all the kitchen appliances and the car are much better off whenever I do that. So sort of understanding the limits of our own expertise.
Great.
Okay, since you mentioned across the pond about Brexit, I'd like to bring up the issue with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and what I see as a conspiracy around Jews and Zionism undermining the left. Are you familiar with that? What happened with the Labour Party? It's still going on.
So there was a lot of accusations that Corbyn and others in the Labour Party were anti-Semitic, and this became sort of an ongoing criticism of Corbyn.
Right, exactly. And then the people the Jews who said they were being anti-Semitic were attacked as being Zionists, tools of Israel. Jewish student groups are being accused of this. So this is on, even though Jeremy Corbyn was kicked out of the Labour Party and then brought back in and has been basically castrated of his power, the problem, the conspiracy theory that I see still continues. It's very strong and very mainstream, and supported by groups here in the United States as well. For example, there's one university professor in the UK now who was put on temporary leave because he accused his students, the Jewish student groups, of being tools of Israel and undermining him purposely, when they mention he's being anti-Semitic. And he's scheduled to teach classes again next semester. And the university hasn't addressed the fact that he's basically accused his students of being spies and undermine him, and a conspiracy theory. So I don't know if I would like to see those kind of issues addressed more under the conspiracy theory label, as much of anti-Semitism kind of falls under that. And I see this as a really rampant accusation, conspiratorial accusation, it doesn't get addressed as such, really.
So there's a lot in that question. I'll just pick up the part that's probably more pertaining to me. Normally there is a relationship between education and conspiracy theorizing, such that more educated people tend to do less of it. But I could invite you to a faculty meeting sometime and you'll see all sorts of conspiracy theories getting tossed around, whether it's the students are conspiring against me or the administration is conspiring against us or who knows what. So, that doesn't shock me that there are professors with these theories out there. Just up the road from me, there was a professor who believed that the Sandy Hook shooting was faked and had harassed the families, and he lost his job over it. Of course, the university didn't fire him for that officially. It was for some weird paperwork issue. But we all know that's what it was for. And this sort of stuff brings up very important questions of tolerance. Like, how much are we willing to tolerate from politicians, from professors, from whoever, when they engage in these sorts of theories? Frankly, for professors, I think there needs to be a very wide berth, so that we can track down different theories and not worry about whoever it is, Big Brother, sort of saying, you can't say that or you can't research that. At the same time, I think if people are in the classroom accusing their students of working against them, that to me has to do less with the conspiracy theory in that sense, and then just be, sort of harassing students, or whatever. In terms of the Corbyn stuff, I know the broad strokes, so I just don't want to comment too much on what goes on. I usually spend 1 month or a month and a half in Britain every year, sort of keeping track of what's going on there. Because of the pandemic, I haven't been able to since 2019. So I've been paying less attention to Corbyn lately.
Yeah, well, one thing Wayne asked in the chat, and he wasn't called on, it had to do with, if ads aren't effective, why do people spend billions of dollars a year on them? I've actually, should be in your lane, if I understand correctly. I've actually seen figures that show it costs something like $12 or $20 an hour to watch television, if you figure out how much people actually do increase their spending as a result of ads. Have you ever seen such numbers?
So I do a lot less with like car ads. I'm more interested in political ads and things that might push conspiracy theories.
Okay, but I think his point is still important, which is, if ads aren't effective, why do people spend billions of dollars a year on them?
Well, let me put that in terms of politics, right? A lot of times political candidates are advertising because the other candidate is, right? Go back a year before an election. You know how everyone's going to vote before the candidates have even been announced. You know how most people are going to vote already. And the world can burn in between, and you can have billions of dollars spent on the campaigns, but most people's minds are already made up. And there's only a tiny, tiny percent of people who are going to vote who truly don't have their mind made up and can't have their votes predicted. And that's sort of the interesting thing with political campaigns. Political scientists have spent the last 50 years trying to figure out, do political ads do anything at all? And the answer is, we've been looking at what effect do campaigns have? And the answer is, we're not sure. So in terms of persuading people to do things they wouldn't have already done, it's just not the case that these ads do all that much, that the campaigns change that many minds. And here's the thing, you can predict people's votes a year in advance, and for a lot of people, you could pick it 10, 20, 30 years in advance and be pretty spot on. And that's disturbing to a lot of people, because we'd like to think that I'm so rational and I'm going to watch the campaign and make up my own mind. Well, your mind's already made up. That's the thing. And our partisanship is stable over long periods of time. Our ideologies, by the age we're at in this room, are pretty well formed and stable. And one ad isn't going to, flip you,
Okay,
right? And even an entire campaign might not flip you. So,
okay, thank you for that. I was mostly just repeating Wayne's thing, but I had another question, which when Marion asked her question, you said, so you want people to agree with you. I'm not sure that I would take it that that's what she meant. I mean, there are important issues of like survival, like the climate crisis or COVID, where it's not just, well, I like chocolate and you like vanilla or whatever. What do you say about, what do we do about those sort of existential matters of survival, like COVID or the climate crisis?
well, so it would be neat if there was a way that we could get everyone to agree on everything, right? Whether it was a fact or even an opinion. We'd love to have people agree with us, right? And for the cases that you bring up, where there's life and death involved, we want people to know you should get vaccinated, you should wear a mask, you should socially distance, COVID is real, because there are real stakes here. But again, even if I had that secret tool to convince you of that, it wouldn't be limited to that, right? I would be able to use it on anything, whether that anything is true or false.
Well, I
And
don't
simply,
know.
all I want to say here is that that it's noble to say, I want to use persuasion and evidence to get people to believe, the most evidence things. And I completely agree with that. I don't want to downplay it. But I want to say too, that there's been such a search lately for that thing that can make people change their belief, that if we think about it a little bit more, that's a scary thing into itself. And I'm not sure that having those sorts of tools would always be used for good.
Well, I think you made an important point that I'd like you to say a little bit more about, is that it's not a matter of flipping somebody to my belief. It's a matter of getting them to look at evidence to make a rational decision. I mean, I'd like a tool that does that, because I could be wrong, but I would like I'd like everybody to make more of an effort to look at actual evidence.
Me too. Great. So that would be wonderful. And there are lots of scholars working on those sorts of projects where they're trying to say, what's the best way to present data to the public? What's the best way to do press conferences? I've done work over the last few years, not just on trying to see what drives conspiracy theories, but also what gets people to act in better ways despite the conspiracy theories. And here's the thing, working at this mostly from the point of trying to find out what drives belief, our beliefs are often the cause of things that are so ingrained in us. The evidence often just doesn't matter that much. And even in instances where it does, we're stuck playing this game of whack-a-mole. Right, where if I'm talking to hardcore conspiracy theorists there, I might be able to change their mind about one thing, but they've got 800 other conspiracy theories. How much time am I going to spend with this person? And then tomorrow they'll just adopt something else anyway. And the reason is because of what's going on inside of them. So I can give them facts and figures and fancy graphs, and maybe that would have an effect on a belief. But at the end of the day, what's driving their beliefs are things that are long-standing, that are sometimes impervious to a fact check or a conversation or a link. They're things that are deeper inside of us, and in those things, I would, listen. I'm with you in this. I'd love to be able to change some people's minds for the better. Come to Thanksgiving, and you'll see what I deal with. but I don't, I'm not sure that I want that. Do I want to monkey around with what's inside somebody? Do I want to change their identity to get them to believe the right things? And maybe this is more, philosophical than a social scientist wants to get, but I don't know. I don't know.
With that, we'll say thank you. Thanks to everybody for your participation. Thanks, Joe, for your talk and sharing all this with us. I think it's just fascinating. Thanks again to Joe for speaking to us, and see you next Sunday at the COVID Talk.